Tonight, we're stepping quietly through the heavy wooden doors of a medieval castle and entering a world of velvet gowns, candlelit halls, royal ceremonies, and secrets hidden behind stone walls. When we imagine a medieval princess, we often picture a beautiful woman wearing a golden crown, walking through a magnificent castle, surrounded by luxury and admiration. But behind that elegant image was a very different reality. A medieval princess was not simply someone who lived a comfortable royal life. From childhood, she was prepared for a role she did not choose. Her future could be decided before she was old enough to understand it. Her education was carefully controlled, her friendships were watched. Her marriage could become a political agreement between powerful families, and every word she spoke could affect the future of kingdoms. Tonight, we'll discover what it was actually like to wake up as a medieval princess. What did she see when she opened her eyes inside a cold stone castle? Who helped her get dressed every morning? What secrets did her servants know? What fears did she hide behind her expensive clothing? And what was life really like when everyone looked at you like a symbol instead of simply a person? So get comfortable, lower the lights, and allow yourself to travel back hundreds of years to a quiet medieval castle where candles flicker against stone walls. Servants move silently through the corridors, and a young princess begins another day inside one of the most fascinating and complicated lives in history. Before we begin, if you enjoy these slow journeys into the forgotten corners of history, you can gently support the channel by leaving a like, and I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Now, settle in, because tonight we're discovering what it was really like to be a medieval princess. The castle is still sleeping. Outside, the morning sky is pale and silver. A thin mist drifts across the courtyard where yesterday's footprints remain pressed into damp earth. Inside one of the upper chambers, a young princess slowly opens her eyes. The room is grand by medieval standards, but not as comfortable as modern imagination often suggests. Stone walls hold the night's cold, a small fire struggles inside the hearth, heavy curtains block the early light, the air smells faintly of smoke, wool, beeswax, and old wood. For a moment, before the servants arrive, she is simply a girl waking up, yet that moment never lasts long. Soon, footsteps echo beyond the door. The day begins. Unlike ordinary children, a princess belongs not only to her family, but to an entire kingdom. Every action carries meaning, every smile is noticed. Every mistake may be remembered. Even her birth was more than a family celebration. The moment she entered the world, powerful people began imagining how her future could serve political goals. Perhaps she would one day marry a neighboring prince. Perhaps she would strengthen an alliance. Perhaps she would help prevent a war. Long before she understood these possibilities, others were already discussing them. And that invisible burden followed her everywhere. Visitors bowed when she entered a room. Servants addressed her with careful respect. Nobles watched her behavior closely, but admiration often created distance. Few people spoke to her naturally. Fewer still treated her as an ordinary child. Behind every royal title stood expectations. Behind every expectation stood pressure, and behind that pressure stood loneliness. Many medieval princesses spent much of their lives surrounded by people, yet surprisingly isolated. Trust was precious, privacy was rare. Even personal conversations could become valuable information within court politics. The castle itself seemed to reflect this strange reality. Its towers symbolized power, its walls promised protection, yet those same walls also limited freedom. A princess could gaze across forests, rivers, and distant hills from a high window, while knowing she might never explore them freely. The world beyond looked enormous. Her own life often felt carefully arranged. Still, There were moments of beauty, the glow of candlelight during winter evenings, the sound of musicians drifting through great halls, the comfort of a trusted nurse, the warmth of a loyal companion. Small moments became precious treasures inside a life governed by duty, and perhaps that is what makes the story of medieval princesses so fascinating, not the jewels, not the crowns, not the ceremonies, but the human being hidden beneath them, a young woman navigating expectations she never created, a life that looked enviable from a distance, yet felt very different from within. As dawn slowly brightens the castle windows, servants prepare for another carefully structured day, and beyond the chamber door, a world of lessons, responsibilities, and unwritten rules is already waiting. Because for a medieval princess, childhood itself was unlike anything most people could imagine. The first light of morning now reaches farther into the castle, touching ancient stones that have witnessed generations come and go. The princess has left the quiet refuge of her chamber. The day has begun, and with it comes a truth that shaped her entire existence. She was born into duty long before she understood what duty meant. Unlike most children of the medieval world, a princess entered life surrounded by ceremony from her very first breath. When church bells rang to announce her birth, the news traveled far beyond the castle walls. Messengers carried letters across forests and mountains. Nobles offered congratulations. Foreign courts took notice. What seemed like the arrival of a baby girl was often viewed as the arrival of a future political asset. Yet inside the nursery, none of those distant calculations mattered. There was only a child who cried in the night, a child who reached for familiar faces, a child who wanted comfort, warmth, and affection. The royal nursery itself was a curious place. It was neither entirely private nor entirely public. Nurses, attendants, tutors, physicians, servants, and visiting family members moved constantly through its doors. The princess was rarely alone. Even as an infant, her life unfolded before many watchful eyes. One of the most important figures in her early years was often not her mother, but her nurse. Royal mothers frequently carried heavy responsibilities of their own. Court ceremonies, household management, diplomatic obligations, and additional pregnancies often demanded much of their attention. As a result, wet nurses and caretakers sometimes became the people a princess saw most often. These women soothed fears, sang lullabies, told stories by firelight, and quietly shaped the emotional world of a future queen. Many princesses formed deep attachments to them, attachments that sometimes lasted a lifetime. As the years passed, childhood slowly expanded beyond the nursery walls. The castle became her world. Its corridors felt endless, its staircases twisted upward into towers, its courtyards echoed with footsteps, barking dogs, and the distant sounds of blacksmiths at work. To a child, the castle could seem almost magical. Every doorway appeared to hide a mystery, every chamber seemed connected to a story. Ancient tapestries displayed heroic figures she had never met. Weathered portraits watched silently from dark walls. Old servants whispered tales of ancestors, miracles, and forgotten events. The castle itself became a living storybook, yet childhood inside those walls was carefully controlled. Unlike ordinary children who might wander fields and forests, a princess rarely enjoyed complete freedom. Her movements were supervised, her companions were chosen with care. Her safety was considered a matter of national importance. After all, she represented more than herself. She represented the future. Even games carried hidden lessons. When she learned proper greetings, she was preparing for diplomacy. When she practiced graceful posture, she was preparing for public appearances. When she sat beside noble visitors during meals, she was quietly learning the complex language of status and rank. the education had already begun, even if nobody called it that yet. Still, there were moments of simple joy, winter snow transforming the courtyard into a white wonderland, colorful banners fluttering during festivals, hunting dogs racing excitedly through the grounds, the arrival of traveling musicians bringing unfamiliar songs. For brief moments, duty stepped into the background. A child simply enjoyed being a child. Those moments mattered, because life would grow more serious with every passing year. As she approached 7 or 8 years old, expectations slowly increased. People paid closer attention to her behavior. Mistakes that once seemed charming now attracted correction. The future princess was beginning to emerge, and everyone around her knew it. The castle also taught another lesson, one rarely spoken aloud. Power and vulnerability often existed together, behind thick walls and guarded gates. Royal families appeared secure, yet illness could arrive without warning, political tensions could shift suddenly, trusted allies could become rivals. Even children learned, in subtle ways, that the world beyond the castle was uncertain. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why medieval courts valued preparation so highly. Every lesson, every rule, every expectation was intended to prepare a royal child for a future nobody could predict. As evening approaches and shadows lengthen across the courtyard, the young princess watches servants light candles one by one. Golden flames begin glowing throughout the castle. Another day of childhood quietly comes to an end, but tomorrow brings new lessons. Because soon, the games of childhood will give way to something far more deliberate. The princess's unusual education is about to begin, and it will shape every chapter of her future life. The next morning arrives quietly. Beyond the castle windows, pale sunlight spreads across the hills, touching the fields below with soft gold. Smoke rises from distant cottages. Birds move through the cool morning air. Inside the castle, however, the day is already underway. The princess is no longer seen merely as a child. A new phase of life has begun. The lessons waiting for her are unlike those taught to most children of the medieval world, because a princess was not educated simply to become knowledgeable. She was educated to become useful, and there was an important difference between the two. At first glance, her education might seem surprisingly gentle. She learned to read simple prayers. She copied letters onto parchment. She practiced speaking with elegance and restraint. She memorized religious teachings, yet beneath these ordinary lessons existed a larger purpose that was rarely discussed openly. Every skill was carefully chosen, every lesson served a future role. The princess's tutors understood something she herself could not yet see. One day, she might find herself in a foreign kingdom. She might sit beside a king. She might negotiate peace between rival families. She might become the mother of future rulers. The education of a princess was preparation for possibilities. Many mornings began in small chambers warmed by fireplaces. Candles flickered gently against stone walls. A tutor unfolded manuscripts copied by hand. The books themselves were treasures. In an age before printing presses, each volume represented countless hours of labor. The princess learned to treat them with care, turning pages slowly, tracing decorated letters with curious eyes, studying stories filled with saints, rulers, and ancient wisdom. To modern people, some of these lessons might seem unusual. A princess was often encouraged to master patience before ambition, silence before argument, observation before action. The ability to listen carefully could be as valuable as the ability to speak. Court life demanded awareness. A careless comment could create problems. A thoughtful response could strengthen alliances. Even as a young girl, she was being trained to navigate a world where words carried extraordinary weight. Languages were often important as well. Depending on the kingdom, a princess might learn Latin, French, or other languages used by nobles and clergy, not because education was considered an end in itself, but because communication opened doors. A future queen unable to understand important conversations would face serious disadvantages, so lessons continued, day after day, season after season, yet education extended far beyond books. The castle itself became a classroom. At meals, she observed noble behavior. During ceremonies, she learned protocol. While watching visitors arrive and depart, she slowly discovered the invisible rules governing power. No formal lesson explained everything. Much was absorbed through observation, a glance, a gesture, a carefully chosen seat at a banquet. Small details revealed social hierarchies that shaped medieval society. There were practical skills as well. Embroidery was highly valued. Music often formed part of noble education. Dancing prepared a princess for court gatherings. Managing household affairs became increasingly important as she grew older. A future queen might oversee large staffs, complex households, and significant resources. Competence mattered more than many people realize. Still, not every lesson was welcomed. Some days felt long, some books felt tedious, some lectures seemed endless. Like children in every era, princesses occasionally daydreamed. Their attention wandered toward windows, toward gardens, toward clouds drifting beyond the castle walls. The desire for adventure lived alongside responsibility, yet gradually, something remarkable happened. The lessons accumulated. Knowledge grew, confidence emerged. The shy child exploring corridors began transforming into a young woman capable of navigating one of the most complicated environments in medieval society. Without fully realizing it, she was changing. The castle noticed, her tutors noticed, even the servants who had watched her grow began noticing. The questions she asked became more thoughtful. The conversations became more mature. The future felt closer than before, and with greater understanding came a new awareness. The world was far larger than the castle, far larger than the kingdom itself. Letters arrived from distant lands, travelers shared stories of unfamiliar cultures, merchants described cities beyond the horizon. Slowly, curiosity expanded beyond childhood imagination. The princess began to glimpse the wider world awaiting her. As evening settles over the castle, her lessons finally end. Books are carefully closed, candles burn lower, the corridors grow quiet. But tomorrow, education will continue in a very different form, because knowledge gained from tutors is only part of a princess's preparation. Soon she will leave the familiar comfort of childhood instruction and step into the living theater of court life itself, where nobles, servants, ambition, and hidden agendas mingle beneath the same roof. The castle feels different now, not because its walls have changed, not because the towers have grown taller, but because the princess is beginning to see things she never noticed before. The lessons of childhood continue. Yet another kind of education has quietly begun, an education without books, without tutors, without written instructions, the education of watching people. As the princess grows older, she spends less time hidden within nurseries and schoolrooms. More frequently, she appears in the great halls, private chambers, gardens, and courtyards where daily castle life unfolds. And for the first time, she begins to understand just how many lives exist beneath the roof of a royal household. From a distance, a medieval castle might seem like the home of a single family. In reality, it was a small world. Hundreds of people could live and work within its walls: nobles, servants, guards, clergy, messengers, cooks, craftsmen, stable workers, musicians. Each person occupied a place within a carefully arranged social order, and the princess stood near the very top of it. Yet being at the top did not mean understanding everyone below. That understanding came slowly. Often through simple observations, a maid rising before dawn to prepare clothing, a servant carrying firewood through winter snow, a cook spending hours over enormous hearths, a messenger arriving exhausted after days on horseback. The princess begins noticing these people, really noticing them, not as background figures moving through corridors, but as individuals, each with responsibilities, each with worries, each with a story. Some servants have known her since infancy. They remember her first steps, her first words, the illnesses she survived, the fears she once carried. In many ways, they know more about her daily life than distant nobles ever could. And yet there remains an invisible boundary between them, a wall that cannot be touched but is always present. Everyone understands it. The princess is royal. They are not. The rules of medieval society leave little room for confusion. Meanwhile, another group attracts her attention, the nobles. Unlike servants, nobles move through the castle with confidence. They wear fine clothing, speak carefully chosen words, and carry themselves as though every room belongs to them. Some are kind, others are ambitious, some offer genuine affection toward the young princess, others see her as something else entirely, an opportunity. Even as a teenager, a royal daughter could represent future influence. Friendship and politics often became difficult to separate. The princess does not fully understand this at first. She simply notices that certain visitors pay unusual attention to her, certain families seem eager to impress her parents, certain conversations stop the moment she enters a room. There are secrets moving through the castle, and she can sense them without yet understanding them. This realization changes how she sees the world. Childhood had once seemed straightforward. People were either familiar or unfamiliar, friendly or unfriendly. Now everything feels more complicated. A smile might hide an agenda, a compliment might serve a purpose, a favor might create an obligation. The court operates according to rules that are rarely spoken aloud. Learning those rules becomes essential. Fortunately, the castle provides countless opportunities for observation. During feasts, she watches nobles compete subtly for attention. During ceremonies, she studies where people stand and whom they greet first. Even seating arrangements reveal hidden hierarchies. Every detail carries meaning. Nothing is entirely accidental. The princess learns to listen more carefully, not just to words, but to tone, to silence, to what people choose not to say. These skills will prove valuable later, though she cannot yet know how valuable. At the same time, life among servants offers a different lesson: humility. Many royal children grow up surrounded by privilege, yet observant princesses witness the labor required to maintain castle life, the endless washing, the cooking, the cleaning, the repairs, the preparation behind every feast and ceremony. Luxury does not appear by magic. Someone creates it, someone works for it, and gradually, the princess begins appreciating the invisible effort surrounding her every day. The castle feels larger than ever now, not because of its architecture, but because of its people. Each corridor contains stories, each chamber contains relationships, each gathering contains hidden currents moving beneath the surface, and somewhere within this complicated world, the princess must find her place. As evening settles over the castle, musicians play softly in a distant hall, candles flicker against ancient stone, servants finish their duties, nobles retire to private chambers. The princess stands quietly beside a window. Looking down into the courtyard below, she is no longer merely learning from books, she is learning from life itself, and beyond the castle walls, forces far greater than court gossip are already beginning to shape her future. Soon, she will discover that being a royal woman means living under rules far stricter than she has ever imagined. rules that govern not only her actions, but even her freedom to choose who she becomes. Night has passed quietly over the castle. The dawn arrives wrapped in mist, drifting across the towers and settling softly over the rooftops below. From her chamber window, the princess watches the first signs of movement appear in the courtyard. Servants carry buckets, guards change positions, kitchen fires awaken once more. Everything seems ordinary, and yet, beneath the familiar rhythm of castle life, invisible rules are shaping every moment of her day. Rules she did not create. Rules that existed long before she was born. Rules that will follow her for the rest of her life. Unlike laws written in books, many of these expectations are never formally explained. Nobody gathers the princess into a room and presents a list. Instead, she learns them gradually, a correction here, a warning there, a raised eyebrow, a disapproving glance. Over time, the message becomes clear: a royal woman is expected to behave in very specific ways. The world around her may appear vast, but the path she is expected to follow is surprisingly narrow. Even simple actions carry meaning: how she walks through a hall, how she greets visitors, how loudly she laughs, how long she speaks, how much attention she attracts. Every detail is observed, every detail is remembered, and because she is a princess, those observations matter. People judge not only her character, but the reputation of her entire family. This burden can feel heavy, especially for someone still growing into adulthood. A nobleman might be forgiven for speaking boldly, a prince might be praised for confidence, but a princess often faces different expectations. She is encouraged to be graceful rather than forceful, patient rather than outspoken, measured rather than impulsive. The standards are rarely equal, yet within medieval society, they are considered normal. The princess begins noticing these differences more often as she grows older. At feasts, men discuss military matters and politics openly. Women are expected to contribute in different ways. Influence certainly exists. Many royal women become powerful advisors, skilled diplomats, and respected leaders. But that influence often operates quietly, through private conversations rather than public declarations. Learning this delicate balance becomes part of her education. There are expectations surrounding appearance as well. Clothing is never just clothing. Every fabric sends a message. Every color communicates status. Every piece of jewelry reflects wealth, family connections, and prestige. When the princess enters a room, people notice these details immediately. What she wears represents more than personal preference, it represents the crown. Even her hair may be styled according to custom and rank. The smallest choices are rarely viewed as entirely her own. Then there is the question of reputation. Perhaps no invisible rule carries greater importance. A royal woman's reputation is treated like a precious treasure, difficult to build, easy to damage. Rumors travel quickly through medieval courts. A careless remark can spread across noble households. A misunderstood interaction can become gossip. A moment of poor judgment can linger for years. Because of this, many princesses live under constant observation, not always by enemies, often by friends, relatives, servants, and allies. Everyone watches, everyone talks, everyone notices. Privacy becomes one of the rarest luxuries in royal life. The princess begins understanding why older noblewomen seem so careful with their words. Why certain conversations occur behind closed doors, why trusted companions are valued so highly. Trust is not given lightly, it must be earned and protected. Yet despite these restrictions, royal women are not powerless figures trapped entirely by circumstance. Many discover ways to shape events around them, through intelligence, through patience, through relationships, through influence exercised quietly rather than loudly. the strongest women often become masters of understanding people, masters of timing, masters of navigating complicated social worlds. The princess studies them carefully. She watches queens, duchesses, ladies of the court, widows who possess decades of experience. Their lessons rarely appear in books, but they may prove more important than anything her tutors have taught. As the day slowly fades into evening, candles are lit throughout the castle once again. Golden light flickers across polished wood and ancient stone. The princess sits quietly among members of the court, listening, observing, learning. The invisible rules no longer seem invisible. She can see them now. And she understands that mastering them may determine much of her future. Because beyond etiquette and reputation lies an even greater expectation, one that has followed royal daughters for centuries. Far away, noble families are already discussing alliances, negotiations, possibilities, and whether this young princess might someday become part of a marriage that could change the course of kingdoms. The castle is unusually quiet tonight. A gentle rain taps against the leaded windows. Candles flicker softly in their iron holders, casting long golden shadows across stone walls polished by centuries of footsteps. The princess sits near the fire, listening to the distant murmur of voices drifting from another chamber. She cannot hear the words, only the rhythm, slow, careful, deliberate, the kind of conversation adults have when discussing matters they believe children should not hear. Yet the older she becomes, the more she realizes that many of those conversations concern her, not because of who she is, but because of what she represents. For much of medieval history, royal marriage was rarely a personal decision. To modern eyes, marriage often appears connected to affection, companionship, or individual choice. For a medieval princess, however, marriage usually served a very different purpose. It was diplomacy, it was strategy, it was politics dressed in silk and gold. Long before a princess reached adulthood, powerful people might already be considering potential matches. Kings discussed possibilities with advisors, queens exchanged letters with distant courts, ambassadors carried proposals across mountains, rivers, and seas. Entire negotiations could unfold around the future of a girl who had never met the man being discussed. Sometimes she was still a child, sometimes she barely understood what marriage meant, yet conversations continued, because in the medieval world, a royal wedding could accomplish things armies could not. A marriage might secure peace between rival kingdoms, strengthen an alliance, resolve a territorial dispute, increase influence, or create valuable connections between powerful families. The princess slowly becomes aware of this reality. At first, she notices only small signs. Visitors arriving unexpectedly, private meetings behind closed doors, letters delivered with unusual urgency, certain names repeated more frequently than others. Gradually, the pieces begin forming a picture. Her future is becoming a subject of discussion, and she is not the one making the decisions. That realization can feel unsettling. The castle that once seemed permanent now feels temporary. Every familiar corridor, every favorite garden, every trusted servant, every childhood memory. One day, she may leave them behind. Many princesses traveled far from home after marriage. Some crossed entire continents. Some entered kingdoms whose languages they barely spoke. Some departed, knowing they might never again see the landscapes of their childhood. The thought lingers quietly in the princess's mind. What would it feel like to leave everything familiar, to step into a foreign court where every face is unknown? To build a life among strangers? Such questions rarely have simple answers. Still, preparations continue. As marriage becomes a more realistic possibility, her education takes on new importance. She studies etiquette more carefully, learns additional languages, observes diplomatic customs, practices the social skills expected of a future queen. Every lesson now points toward a future destination that remains uncertain. Yet despite the political nature of these arrangements, human emotions never disappear completely. Behind every alliance stood real people, real fears, real hopes, real uncertainties. Some royal marriages developed into genuine partnerships, others remained distant. Some brought stability and happiness, others led to loneliness. The future could not be predicted, and perhaps that uncertainty was one of the most difficult parts. The princess knows she may eventually marry a man chosen largely for reasons beyond affection. A man selected because his family, title, lands, or political connections serve a larger purpose. The kingdom expects her to accept this possibility with grace, and often she does, not because the decision is easy, but because duty has been part of her life for as long as she can remember. Even so, moments of private reflection remain. Late at night, during quiet walks, while gazing across distant hills from the castle walls, she wonders about the future, about the unknown, about the life waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Around her, the machinery of medieval politics continues turning. Letters are written, messengers travel, alliances shift, negotiations unfold. The princess may not sit at those tables yet, but their decisions are slowly shaping the course of her life. As the rain outside begins to fade and the castle settles into silence, she extinguishes a candle beside her chair. A darkness gently fills the room. Tomorrow will bring another ordinary day. Lessons, ceremonies, conversations, yet beneath those familiar routines, something important has changed. For the first time, she truly understands that her future may belong not only to herself, and somewhere beyond the castle walls. A wedding that could alter the destiny of kingdoms may already be taking shape, a wedding that, one day, she will be expected to walk toward. The day has finally arrived. For years, it existed only as a distant possibility, a topic whispered about in council chambers, a subject hidden within letters carried across kingdoms, a future event discussed by kings, queens, and diplomats. Now it is real. The castle that once felt permanent is filled with unusual activity. Servants move quickly through corridors. Candles are replaced before they can burn low. Musicians tune instruments. Visitors arrive from distant lands. Every chamber seems alive with preparation, and at the center of it all stands the princess. Soon, she will no longer be simply a princess of her father's household. She will become a wife, perhaps a future queen, perhaps the mother of future rulers, perhaps a stranger in a foreign land. The possibilities feel enormous, yet beneath the ceremony and celebration, another emotion quietly follows her throughout the day: uncertainty. The wedding itself unfolds with great splendor. Rich fabrics cover stone walls, church bells echo across the countryside, nobles gather in magnificent halls, priests recite ancient words, jewels sparkle in candlelight. To those watching, it appears to be a beautiful occasion, a triumph of diplomacy, a moment of royal glory, and in many ways, it is. Yet only a few people understand the thoughts moving through the bride's mind, because while everyone else celebrates an alliance, she is living through a personal transformation. One chapter of life is ending, another is beginning, and there is no way to know exactly what waits ahead. Many medieval princesses married men they barely knew. Sometimes they had exchanged letters, sometimes they had met briefly before the wedding, sometimes they encountered one another only shortly before the ceremony itself. Modern ideas of courtship rarely applied. The relationship would often begin after marriage, not before. This reality created understandable anxiety. The princess may wonder what kind of husband he will become. Will he be kind? Will he be patient? Will he respect her opinions? Will she find companionship in this new life, or will she feel isolated in unfamiliar surroundings? Such questions linger quietly beneath the celebrations, throughout the feast. Guests raise cups in honor of the couple, laughter fills the hall, musicians play cheerful melodies, yet the bride's future remains unwritten. As evening approaches, the atmosphere changes, the excitement of the day gradually gives way to anticipation. The wedding night carries enormous symbolic importance in medieval society, far more than it does today. This is not viewed merely as a private moment between two people. It is considered a matter of dynastic significance. The continuation of royal bloodlines depends upon it. Kingdoms care deeply about heirs, families care deeply about succession. The pressure surrounding these expectations can be immense, particularly for a young bride. Many princesses entered marriage with limited understanding of what lay ahead. Medieval education often emphasized modesty and obedience. Open discussions about intimacy were not always common. As a result, some brides approached their wedding night carrying uncertainty, confusion, or fear. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because society often shielded them from direct knowledge. At the same time, expectations were enormous. A successful marriage was expected to produce children, preferably sons. The future stability of entire dynasties could depend upon those children. It is a remarkable burden to place upon a young woman, yet countless royal brides carried it, quietly, with courage, with determination. Sometimes with hidden worries nobody else could see. As the evening grows later, guests gradually depart. The music softens, candles burn lower. The castle that felt crowded throughout the day begins growing quiet once more. The princess finds herself standing at the edge of a new life. Behind her lies childhood, the familiar rooms of home, the lessons, the routines, the certainty of the world she once knew. Ahead lies something unknown: marriage, responsibility, expectation, and the complicated reality of adulthood. Outside, the night sky stretches above the castle towers. Stars shine over rooftops and distant fields, the same stars that watched countless royal brides before her, women who experienced similar hopes, similar fears, similar moments of uncertainty. History often remembers their weddings, the treaties, the alliances, the political consequences, but rarely does it remember the private emotions of the young woman standing at the center of it all. The beating heart beneath the jeweled gown, the nervous thoughts hidden behind a calm expression, the quiet courage required to step forward when the future cannot be seen. And as the castle settles into silence, another chapter begins, not simply a royal marriage, but a new life inside a world where every choice, every relationship, and every secret carries greater weight than ever before. Tomorrow, the princess will awaken in a very different reality. One hidden behind the doors of the royal household itself. Morning arrives differently now. The princess awakens not in the familiar chamber of her childhood, but in rooms that still feel strange. The ceiling above her is unfamiliar, the arrangement of furniture is different, the voices beyond the door belong to people she is still learning to know. Somewhere in the castle, bells announce the beginning of another day. For a moment, she lies still beneath heavy blankets, listening. The sounds are ordinary. Footsteps in distant corridors, the crackle of a fire, the soft creak of wooden doors, yet everything feels changed, because she has crossed an invisible threshold. She is no longer merely a royal daughter, she is now a royal wife. And with that title comes an entirely new set of expectations. Many people imagine the private chambers of medieval queens and princesses as peaceful retreats, places of comfort hidden away from the demands of court life. The reality was often far more complicated. The queen's chamber was certainly important, but it was rarely private. Throughout the day, a steady stream of people moved through these rooms: ladies-in-waiting, servants, messengers, religious advisors, household officials, tailors, physicians, visitors seeking audiences. The chamber functioned almost like a small court within the larger court. Important conversations occurred here, decisions were discussed, relationships were formed, information was exchanged, even moments that appeared personal often unfolded before witnesses. The new princess quickly discovers that solitude has become a rare luxury. When she wakes, attendants help her dress. When she dines, companions often join her. When letters arrive, others may carry them. When visitors request meetings, servants organize every detail. Very little happens entirely alone. At first, this constant presence can feel overwhelming. The castle watches everything, not intentionally, not maliciously, simply because royal life operates that way. The higher one's status, the fewer truly private moments exist, and yet, despite this lack of privacy, the Queen's chamber also becomes a place where secrets quietly gather. Ladies-in-waiting often hear things others do not. Trusted attendants observe moods, tensions, and conversations. Servants notice who visits frequently and who suddenly disappears. The chamber becomes a crossroads where personal lives intersect with political realities. Information flows constantly, some of it harmless, some of it significant. The princess learns quickly that listening can be as important as speaking. A casual remark may reveal hidden concerns. A brief conversation may hint at larger problems. The ability to understand people becomes increasingly valuable. This skill is especially important because pressure surrounds her from every direction. The court wants stability, the kingdom wants reassurance, the royal family wants success, and everyone seems eager to judge whether the new marriage is fulfilling expectations. Questions arrive politely, sometimes indirectly, sometimes disguised as friendly curiosity. How is she adjusting? Is she comfortable? Does she enjoy her new home? Behind these questions often lies another concern. Will she produce an heir? Though nobody asks it openly every day, the expectation remains ever present. The future of dynasties depends upon children, particularly sons. The weight of that expectation can be difficult to escape, especially for a young woman still adapting to an unfamiliar environment. Yet life inside the Queen's chamber is not entirely defined by pressure. There are moments of comfort as well. Friendships begin to form, trusted companions emerge, certain ladies-in-waiting become sources of support and understanding. Shared conversations help ease loneliness. Laughter occasionally fills the room. Stories are exchanged beside evening fires. Small rituals create familiarity within unfamiliar surroundings. Over time, the chamber begins feeling less like a place she occupies and more like a place she belongs. Still, the challenges never disappear completely. The princess learns that influence often begins here, not in grand halls filled with nobles, not during public ceremonies, but in private conversations held behind carefully closed doors. A thoughtful suggestion offered at the right moment, a relationship nurtured patiently over time, a concern communicated quietly. Royal women often exercise power in subtle ways, and many of those subtle moments originate within these chambers. As night falls, candles cast warm pools of light across embroidered fabrics and polished wood. The castle gradually grows quiet. Visitors depart, conversations fade. At last, the princess finds herself alone for a few precious moments. She gazes into the dancing flames of a nearby candle, thinking, reflecting, adjusting to a life she is still learning to understand. Beyond these walls, the kingdom continues its endless rhythm. But inside the Queen's chamber, another story is unfolding, a story of relationships, expectations, whispered conversations, and hidden influence, and among all those secrets lies a surprising truth. Some of the people who understand royal life best are not kings or queens at all. They are the servants who witness everything. The castle is asleep, or at least, it appears to be. Moonlight rests softly upon the towers. The great halls stand empty. Fires burn low within enormous hearths. Most noble guests have retired to their chambers. From the outside, silence seems to have settled across the entire household, but deep within the castle, another world remains awake. A servant carries fresh water through a narrow corridor, a maid folds garments for the coming morning, a kitchen worker prepares dough before dawn arrives, a guard quietly walks his route along the walls. The castle never truly sleeps, and because it never sleeps, there is always someone watching, not spies, not conspirators, simply servants doing their work. Yet these ordinary people often witnessed more of royal life than anyone else. The princess is beginning to understand this. For years, she viewed servants as part of the castle itself, reliable, familiar, always present, like the stone walls or flickering candles. Now she sees them differently. She realizes that they are observers, silent witnesses to countless moments hidden from history. A king might meet with advisors in private, but a servant prepares the room beforehand. Queen might receive an important letter, but someone carries it through the corridor. A prince may celebrate a victory. A maid later tidies the chamber where the celebration occurred. Royal life leaves traces everywhere, and servants notice those traces. Most are remarkably discreet. Their livelihoods often depend upon it. Loyalty is highly valued in great households. Loose gossip can be dangerous. Careless words can create serious problems. Even so, servants naturally become some of the most informed people in the castle. They know who wakes before sunrise, who remains awake late into the night, who is cheerful, who is troubled, who receives visitors, who avoids them, not because they seek secrets, because their duties place them near every corner of royal life. The princess begins paying closer attention to these people, partly out of curiosity, partly out of gratitude. Many have served the household for decades. Some knew her parents before she was born. Others helped raise her from infancy. A trusted maid may remember childhood fears long forgotten. An elderly steward may recall family stories stretching back generations. The servants possess a different kind of knowledge, one not found in books, one not preserved in official records, the knowledge of everyday life. And everyday life often reveals more about a person than public ceremonies ever can. The princess notices this most clearly during difficult moments, when celebrations end, when guests depart, when public smiles disappear. Servants witness what remains: the exhaustion after grand feasts, the worry after troubling news, the quiet sadness that occasionally touches even the most powerful people. Royal families may appear larger than life to outsiders, but servants see something different. They see human beings. People who become ill, people who argue, people who grieve, people who doubt themselves. The crown never entirely removes humanity, and servants understand that better than most. Some relationships between royals and servants become surprisingly close. Not equal. Medieval society rarely allows that, yet genuine affection often develops. A nurse who comforted a frightened child, a maid who provided kindness during lonely years, a steward who offered steady guidance through uncertain times. These bonds could last decades, sometimes a lifetime. Trust becomes valuable currency within the castle, especially for someone living under constant observation. The princess learns another important lesson as well. Servants often understand practical realities that nobles overlook. They know which parts of the castle become coldest in winter, which roofs leak during heavy rain, which supplies are running low, which workers are struggling. Their perspective differs from that of noble courts and royal councils, yet it is no less important. A kingdom depends upon countless unseen people performing countless unseen tasks. The castle itself depends upon them, every meal, every fire, every cleaned chamber, every repaired wall, every successful ceremony. Without servants, royal life would quickly fall apart, and still, history rarely remembers their names. That thought lingers with the princess. As she moves through corridors and halls, she begins noticing individuals rather than uniforms, faces rather than functions, lives rather than roles. The castle feels richer somehow, more human, more complex. As evening approaches once again, servants light candles throughout the household. Tiny flames appear one after another, pushing back the gathering darkness. The princess watches from a gallery above. Below, dozens of people continue their work quietly. Most will never appear in chronicles, most will never have songs written about them, yet they help shape every day of royal existence, and in many ways, they know the castle better than anyone, because while kings rule from thrones and nobles compete for influence, servants move through every hidden corner. They witness celebrations, disappointments, victories, secrets, and sometimes they notice dangers long before anyone else does. For beneath the beauty of royal life, hidden threats are waiting in the shadows of the medieval world. The castle looks peaceful from a distance, stone walls glowing softly in the morning light, tall towers rising above mist-covered fields, birds circling slowly in the sky as if nothing in the world could disturb this quiet place. But inside those walls, the princess is beginning to understand something that cannot be seen from afar. Beauty does not mean safety, and safety is never guaranteed. Life inside a medieval castle carried dangers that were often invisible at first glance, not the dramatic kind found in stories and legends, but quiet dangers, slow dangers, dangers that moved through daily life like unseen shadows. Illness was one of the greatest of these threats. A simple fever, a cough that worsened over days, a wound that did not heal properly. In a world without modern medicine, even small ailments could become serious. Physicians did their best with the knowledge they had. Herbs, rest, and careful observation formed the foundation of treatment, but recovery was never certain. The princess begins to notice how often people fall ill within the castle, a servant missing from duties for days, a noble recovering behind closed doors, a child kept away from others as a precaution. Health feels fragile here, like something that can change without warning. Fire is another silent danger, essential for warmth, cooking, and light, yet unpredictable. A hearth left unattended for a moment, a candle knocked slightly off balance, a dry wooden beam catching a spark. The castle depends on fire, but it also fears it. Even in calm moments, someone is always watching it carefully, always adjusting it, always ensuring it does not grow beyond control. Then there are accidents, stone staircases worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, corridors dimly lit by flickering torches, heavy wooden doors that swing unexpectedly, rooftops exposed to wind and rain. A simple misstep could lead to injury. The castle is grand, but not forgiving. The princess begins to move through it more carefully now, not out of fear, but awareness. There are also dangers that come from people, not always open hostility, often subtle tension. Court life, as she is learning, is a place where emotions are rarely expressed directly. Rivalries exist beneath polite conversation. Ambition hides behind respectful bows. Words are carefully chosen, but meanings often run deeper than they appear. A single misunderstanding can spread quietly. A rumor can shift opinions, a favor can create unseen obligations. The princess starts noticing how carefully some people choose their words when she is near, how conversations pause when she enters a room, how certain smiles feel practiced rather than natural. It is not always possible to know what others truly think. That uncertainty becomes its own kind of vulnerability, yet perhaps the most unsettling realization is not about illness, fire, or court politics. It is about how quickly stability can change. A trusted advisor can disappear from court. A political alliance can shift without warning. A peaceful agreement can slowly unravel over distant disagreements. Even kingdoms, despite their power, are not permanent in the way people imagine. The princess begins to understand that she lives in a world where change is constant beneath the surface. Nothing remains exactly as it is. Still, life continues its rhythm. Morning prayers, afternoon duties, evening gatherings. The castle carries on as if nothing beneath it is uncertain, and most people learn to live with that quiet instability, to focus on daily routines, to trust what is visible, to accept what cannot be controlled. But awareness changes how the princess sees everything. A candle is no longer just light, it is protection against darkness. A locked door is no longer just privacy, it is security. A familiar face is no longer just comfort, it is trust that must be maintained. Even beauty begins to feel layered. Tapestries, jewelry, fine clothing, all symbols of status, but also reminders of how fragile life can be beneath surface appearances. Still, there are moments of peace, sunlight falling across a courtyard, the sound of distant music drifting through open windows, quiet laughter shared between trusted companions. These moments matter more now than before, because they stand out against the awareness of everything that could go wrong. As evening arrives, the castle settles into its familiar glow. Candles are lit in rows, shadows stretch across stone floors. The princess sits near a window, watching the world outside slowly fade into darkness. From here, the castle still looks like a place of safety, and in many ways, it is, but she understands now that safety is never absolute. It is something carefully maintained, something quietly protected, something that depends on countless unseen hands. And as night fully surrounds the castle, another thought lingers gently in her mind. If even this place, so strong and so ancient, holds hidden fragility, then what else in the world is not what it seems? Morning light slips gently through narrow castle windows. The stone walls are still cool from the night. Somewhere below, the kitchens are already awake, not loudly, not chaotically, but with steady, practiced rhythm. Like a world that has been repeating the same quiet routine for centuries, the princess is beginning to understand that even food in the castle is not simple. It is not just about hunger, it is not just about taste, it is about order, timing, rank, and expectation. Meals in a medieval royal household followed structure more strict than most people would imagine. The day was divided into carefully arranged moments of eating, and each moment carried meaning. Breakfast, in many noble households, was often modest. Sometimes it was not even considered a formal meal at all. A piece of bread, a small portion of cheese, perhaps some fruit when available. Something simple enough to begin the day without drawing attention. Warmth came more from the fire than from the food itself. As the day progresses, the castle becomes more alive. The kitchens, however, have been alive for hours already. Large hearths burn constantly, cauldrons hang over open flames, knives strike wood, water boils, bread is kneaded and left to rise. Meat is prepared with careful attention, often salted or roasted for preservation. Vegetables, when available, are gathered from gardens or nearby fields. Food in this world depends heavily on season, storage, and travel. nothing is guaranteed. The princess begins to notice how much effort exists behind every meal she receives. By midday, the most important meal of the day often takes place. Tables are arranged in the great hall. Cloth is laid carefully. Dishes are brought in sequence rather than all at once. Presentation matters almost as much as taste. For a princess, meals are rarely private experiences. She is often accompanied by ladies-in-waiting, by attendants, sometimes by visiting nobles. Even silence at the table carries meaning. Who sits where, who is served first, who receives certain portions, everything reflects hierarchy, yet beneath the structure, there is something deeply human about these moments. Warm bread, shared from a common tray, the scent of roasted meat filling a hall, the comfort of familiar flavors after long hours of lessons or ceremonies. Even in a world governed by strict rules, food remains one of the simplest pleasures. Afternoons may bring lighter refreshments, small pastries, fruit, nuts, herbal drinks. These are often taken during conversations or informal gatherings. It is during these quieter moments that the princess sometimes learns the most about the people around her. Stories are shared, rumors drift gently from one conversation to another, advice is offered in subtle ways, and trust is slowly built over shared tables. By evening, the final and most elaborate meal of the day often takes place. Feasts in royal castles can be impressive affairs, multiple courses, roasted meats, fresh bread, seasonal dishes, wine, and spiced drinks for those permitted to partake. Musicians may perform softly in the background. Candles illuminate polished wood and stone. But even these grand meals follow structure. There is little chaos, everything has its place, everything has its order. The princess begins to notice something else as well. Food is not only nourishment, it is communication. A well-prepared dish can honor a guest, a carefully arranged table can signal respect, a shared meal can strengthen alliances, and sometimes, what is not served is just as important as what is. Behind the beauty of these meals lies a vast network of labor. Cooks rising before dawn, servants carrying water and firewood, farmers tending fields outside the castle walls, hunters bringing game from forests. Every plate represents dozens of unseen hands. The princess starts to see food differently now, not just as something placed before her, but as something carried through many lives before reaching her table. There are also days when food becomes a reminder of uncertainty, when supplies run low after long winters, when certain ingredients are unavailable, when travel is delayed by weather or conflict. Even a royal household is not free from the limits of nature, and yet life adapts. Substitutions are made, menus change. Creativity becomes necessary. As evening settles over the castle once again, the kitchens begin to quiet, fires dim, work tables are cleaned, leftover food is carefully stored or distributed, the rhythm slows. Above, in the quieter chambers, the princess reflects on something she had not considered before. Food is not just about survival, it is about connection, between people, between seasons, between land and table, between past labor and present life, and in the silence of the castle night, she realizes that even the simplest meal carries a hidden story, if one knows how to look closely enough. The morning begins not with noise, but with preparation. Before the princess sees the daylight fully, the castle is already awake in a quieter, more careful way. Somewhere beyond the chamber doors, attendants are gathering fabrics, warming water, arranging combs, and laying out garments that have been chosen long before this moment, because in a medieval royal household, clothing is never a simple decision, it is structure, it is identity. It is message. The princess sits still as her ladies-in-waiting begin the slow process of dressing her for the day, layer by layer. fabric by fabric. Nothing is rushed, nothing is casual. The first garments are simple, close to the body. Soft linen beneath heavier layers. Then comes the dress itself, often made of wool, silk, or finely woven cloth depending on the season and the wealth of the court. Over this, additional layers may be added: sleeves, cloaks, embroidered panels, each piece carefully arranged to reflect status and occasion. Even the colors matter: deep reds, muted greens, faded golds, rich blues reserved for certain ranks or ceremonial moments. Dyes are expensive, and therefore meaningful. The more vibrant the color, the greater the effort required to produce it, and in this world, effort often translates into importance. Jewelry follows next, not worn simply for beauty, but for symbolism. Brooches that represent family ties, rings that mark alliances, necklaces that signal wealth and political strength. Even the smallest detail can carry meaning understood instantly by those who observe closely. The princess learns early that people in court notice everything. A slightly different style, a new ornament, a changed hairstyle, all of it is read like language. Beauty itself is not separate from politics, it is part of it. Her hair is carefully arranged, often braided or pinned in intricate patterns that require patience and skill. Some styles take longer than others, some require assistance from multiple attendants. During these moments, conversation flows quietly around her, not rushed, not loud, but steady, as if grooming is not just preparation, but ritual. There is something deeply controlled about royal appearance. Even comfort is structured, even relaxation is designed. Nothing is entirely spontaneous. As the princess grows older, she begins to understand that clothing is also protection, not from weather, but from judgment. A well-dressed royal woman is treated differently than one who is not properly presented. Respect is influenced by appearance. Confidence is shaped by perception, and perception, in court life, is everything. There are also expectations that change with age and status. A young princess may wear simpler styles. A married royal woman adopts more formal attire. A queen is expected to appear with even greater dignity and restraint. Clothing marks transitions in life just as clearly as words or ceremonies. Yet beneath all this structure, there are moments of quiet fascination, the softness of rare fabric, the weight of embroidered patterns under candlelight, the subtle shimmer of threads woven with gold or silver. Even the sound of fabric moving through stone corridors becomes part of the castle's atmosphere. And then there are the strange realities of medieval fashion: sleeves that are more decorative than practical, cloaks that trail longer than expected, headpieces that require careful balance. Some garments are designed more for appearance than comfort, but comfort was rarely the priority in royal presentation. The princess begins to notice how clothing affects behavior, how posture changes when wearing heavier garments, how movement becomes more deliberate, how presence feels more formal when dressed for ceremony. Clothing shapes the way she carries herself, not just how she looks, but how she exists within a room. At times, dressing can take a long time, long enough for the morning light to shift across the chamber floor, long enough for conversations to unfold, pause, and continue again, long enough for silence to feel natural rather than empty. And in those quiet hours, the princess often thinks about how different her life has become compared to childhood. Once, clothing was simple, functional, easy. Now it is layered with meaning she is still learning to fully understand. As the day progresses, she moves through halls and courtyards fully dressed in the expectations of her role, and she notices something subtle: people respond differently depending on how she is presented. Not just because of who she is, but because of what she appears to be. Royal clothing does not just reflect identity, it shapes it. By evening, When garments are carefully removed and replaced with simpler attire, there is a small sense of release. The weight of formality softens, the castle feels slightly less rigid, candles glow gently in quieter rooms, and the princess, now free from layers of silk and embroidery, sits beside a window watching the fading light. She understands now that even beauty in her world is not simply personal, it is constructed, maintained, and carefully controlled, and as night settles over the castle once again, she wonders how many parts of herself have already been shaped not by choice, but by expectation. Time moves differently inside a medieval castle, not faster, not slower, but heavier. As if each hour carries its own quiet weight through stone corridors and candlelit rooms, the princess has begun to notice this rhythm more clearly now. There are mornings that feel full of purpose, lessons, visits, small ceremonies, structured routines that guide the day forward, but there are also long stretches of time that feel open, unfilled, waiting. In a world without modern distractions, time is not something to be consumed, it is something to be lived through, and sometimes, simply endured. During these long hours, the castle becomes quieter than expected, not empty, never empty, but softened. Servants move with less urgency, footsteps echo more clearly, windows cast shifting patterns of light across stone floors. The princess often finds herself in these in-between moments, not in ceremony, not in instruction, not in conversation, but simply existing within the space of the castle. She learns to observe, and observation slowly becomes its own form of occupation. From high windows, she watches the courtyard below. Servants crossing paths, horses being led to water, leaves shifting in the wind. Life continues, even when she is not directly part of it. Inside the great halls, tapestries tell stories she has seen many times before, yet still finds herself studying again. Ancient battles, mythical scenes, figures frozen in woven threads, silently repeating their moment for centuries. There is something strangely calming about them. They do not change, unlike everything else around her. There are also moments spent in gardens. When weather allows, the princess walks slowly along stone paths lined with herbs, flowers, and carefully maintained hedges. The scent of plants becomes part of the memory of the castle itself. Rosemary, lavender, mint, earth after rain. Even silence feels different outdoors, less enclosed, more open, yet still contained within the distant reach of castle walls. Sometimes she is accompanied, sometimes she is alone. Both experiences feel different, but equally reflective. In companionship, conversation flows gently, often without urgency. In solitude, thoughts move more freely, drifting between memory and imagination. The princess begins to understand that much of royal life is not defined by action alone, but by waiting, waiting for letters, waiting for visitors, waiting for seasons to change, waiting for decisions made by others, waiting for moments that are scheduled long in advance. Even meals, ceremonies, and gatherings are carefully placed within the structure of time. Nothing is truly random, everything is arranged, and between those arrangements lie long stretches of stillness. During these periods, small habits form: reading, embroidery, music practice, simple walks through familiar corridors, watching light change through stained glass windows, listening to distant sounds of the castle working beyond view. The princess also begins to notice how memory behaves in such a place. Certain rooms carry echoes of past events: a hall where a feast was once held, a chamber where important news arrived, a staircase where footsteps once felt hurried or uncertain. The castle itself seems to remember, not in words, but in atmosphere. There are also moments of quiet reflection that arrive unexpectedly. While sitting beside a window, while resting in a garden, while waiting for an audience that has been delayed. In these moments, the princess becomes more aware of herself, not as a symbol, not as a role, but as a person moving through time. Thoughts that cannot always be spoken begin to take shape. Questions about the future, about change, about identity, about the life unfolding slowly ahead of her. The long hours give space for those thoughts to grow, and sometimes that is both comforting and unsettling. As the day shifts toward evening, the castle begins to change again. Candles are lit, shadows stretch across walls, voices become softer, movement slows. The same space that felt open during the day now feels enclosed in a different way, warmer, closer, more intimate. The princess returns to her chamber as night settles over the castle. Outside her window, the world grows dark and still, but inside her mind, thoughts continue moving quietly. She is beginning to understand something important. Life inside the castle is not only defined by events, it is shaped just as much by the spaces between them, and in those spaces, she is slowly becoming someone new. The castle is full of voices. Always, even in the quietest hours, there is life somewhere within its walls, a door closing in the distance, a servant walking along a corridor, a fire being stoked in a distant hall. Yet for the princess, there are moments when all of it feels strangely far away, as if sound itself cannot quite reach where she stands. It is a peculiar kind of loneliness, not the emptiness of being alone, but the distance of being surrounded. From the outside, her life appears full. Attendants are always nearby, conversations are always happening, meals are shared, ceremonies are attended. She is rarely physically alone, and yet, emotional solitude can exist even in crowded rooms. The princess begins to notice this more clearly as she grows older. People speak to her often, but not always as they would speak to someone their own age, not always as they would speak freely to a friend. There is caution in many conversations, careful phrasing, measured responses, a sense that words must be chosen with awareness of who is listening. This creates a subtle barrier, not visible, not spoken, but always present. Even those who care for her deeply sometimes keep a respectful distance, not out of coldness, but out of understanding of her position. A princess is never just a person in a room. She is also a symbol of a family, a court, and a future, and symbols are observed differently than ordinary people. There are moments when laughter fills the castle, warm gatherings, shared stories, music echoing through stone halls, but even in those moments, the princess sometimes feels slightly apart from it all, not excluded, not ignored, simply positioned differently within it, like standing on a higher step in a long staircase, where the perspective changes even if the scene remains the same. She sees people, she understands them, but there is always a quiet awareness that her experience is not identical to theirs. Friendship, too, becomes more complicated. Some companions are genuine, people who offer kindness without expectation, people who remember her not only as royalty, but as someone they have known for years. Yet even these relationships exist within boundaries shaped by rank. There are things they can say freely to each other, and things that will always remain unspoken. The castle itself reinforces this distance in subtle ways. Rooms are large, corridors long, doors heavy, spaces designed to accommodate power, ceremony, and hierarchy. Even comfort is structured around status. The higher one stands in rank, the more space surrounds them, but space does not always equal warmth. At night, when candles burn low and most of the castle grows quiet, the feeling of distance sometimes becomes stronger. The princess may sit near a window, watching the dark horizon outside, stars scattered across the sky, a world beyond the walls that feels both close and unreachable. In those moments, memories of childhood sometimes return. Not as longing for simplicity, but as recognition of how much has changed. There were times when connection felt easier, when conversations were unguarded, when identity was not yet shaped by expectation. Now, every interaction carries awareness of role and consequence. And that awareness can be tiring, yet the princess also begins to understand something deeper about loneliness. It is not always a flaw in life. Sometimes it is a result of position, of responsibility, of the space between what others see and what is privately felt. Many who live in castles experience it in different forms: kings, queens, nobles, even servants, in their own ways, know solitude. But for a princess, it often exists alongside constant visibility, always seen, rarely fully known. Still, there are moments that soften it: a trusted companion sharing quiet conversation by candlelight, a brief walk through the garden with someone who does not rush the silence, a familiar presence that does not require performance or formality. These moments do not remove loneliness completely, but they make it easier to carry. As seasons change beyond the castle walls, the princess continues to grow into her role, more aware now of the invisible distance that comes with her position, more accepting of it, though never entirely at peace with it. And perhaps that is what defines her life most clearly at this stage: not just duty, not just privilege, but the quiet space in between, where she learns to exist both within the castle and slightly apart from it. Before the sun fully rises over the castle, the day has already begun in silence, not the silence of sleep, but the silence of ritual. Somewhere within the stone walls, a bell rings softly, not loud, not urgent, but steady, familiar, almost comforting. It is a sound that belongs to every day of the princess's life now. Religion is not something separate from daily existence in the medieval world. It is woven into it, like fabric stitched into every moment of time. Morning prayers come first, before the court gathers, before lessons begin, before conversations fill the halls. The princess stands with others in a dimly lit chapel. Candles flicker against stone walls. The air carries the scent of wax, incense, and cold stone warmed by breath. Voices rise gently in shared prayer, not rushed, not dramatic, but steady, practiced, and deeply familiar. For many in the castle, this rhythm provides structure, a way to begin the day with order, a way to feel connected to something larger than the uncertain world outside. The princess participates as she always has, hands folded, eyes lowered, voice blending into the collective sound. Yet as she grows older, her understanding of these rituals becomes more layered. It is no longer just repetition, it is meaning, an expectation, and hope. Religion in the medieval world is not only personal belief. It is public life, it is political life, it is emotional life. It shapes decisions, guides behavior, offers comfort during illness, an explanation during loss. There are prayers for protection, prayers for safe travel, prayers for good harvests, prayers for health, marriage, and peace. Every stage of life carries its own words, its own rituals, its own hopes expressed through tradition. Alongside formal religion, there are quieter beliefs that exist throughout the castle, superstitions that people rarely question, whispers passed from servant to servant, old traditions that linger in kitchens, corridors, and gardens. Some believe certain stones bring protection. Others avoid specific days for travel or important decisions. A spilled salt might carry meaning, a sudden silence in a room might be noticed more than spoken aloud. The princess learns these beliefs not from books, but from observation. From watching how people behave when they think no one important is listening. There is a delicate balance between faith and superstition, between doctrine and daily habit. between what is taught and what is felt, and in a world where uncertainty is constant, people often hold tightly to anything that offers a sense of control. Even small rituals become important, lighting candles at specific times, repeating prayers before sleep, touching a familiar object for comfort, crossing oneself when passing a chapel. These actions are not always discussed, but they are deeply present. As the princess moves through her days, she begins to notice how often these rituals appear. In servants before difficult tasks, in nobles before important meetings, in quiet moments of fear or uncertainty, religion becomes a shared language, even when spoken differently. There are also moments when faith feels deeply personal, when a loss occurs within the castle, when illness spreads, when news arrives from distant lands. In such moments, silence often replaces conversation, and prayer becomes more intense, more focused, more emotional. The princess sees how people turn inward during such times, how belief becomes a place to place sorrow, or hope, or fear that cannot be spoken aloud. The chapel itself becomes a space of contrast, at times filled with ceremony and gathering, at other times completely empty, waiting, quiet. Its stillness feels different from the rest of the castle, as if time slows slightly within its walls. As evening approaches, the castle shifts again. Candles are lit in sequence, shadows lengthen across floors and tapestries. The sounds of daily life soften into background hum, and in these final hours of the day, personal reflection often returns. The princess sometimes finds herself thinking about the invisible structure that surrounds her life, not just rules of court, not just expectations of rank, but beliefs that shape how people interpret the world itself, why things happen, what they mean, how they should be understood. Religion and superstition together form a kind of invisible framework, one that touches every decision, every fear, every hope, even when not spoken directly, even when not fully understood. As night settles over the castle once more, the chapel bell rings softly again in the distance. A final reminder that the day is ending as it began, with ritual, with rhythm, with quiet certainty in an uncertain world. And as the princess lies down to rest, she understands something new. In this world, belief is not just something people hold, it is something that holds them. The castle never truly stays quiet for long. Even in its calmest hours, something is always moving beneath the surface, not loud movement, not visible chaos, but something quieter, more human, whispers, conversations that begin in one corner and travel unseen through corridors and chambers. The princess has begun to notice it more clearly now, the way words change shape as they move from person to person, the way meaning can shift without anyone ever realizing it. Court life is not only built on ceremonies and traditions, it is also built on relationships, and relationships, in a place like this, are never simple. Friendships exist, genuine ones, but they are often layered with awareness of rank, of family ties, of future possibilities. A companion who laughs with you in the morning might also belong to a family with political interests. A trusted lady-in-waiting might also carry information back to her household. Even kindness can have consequences. The princess learns this slowly, not through direct lessons, but through patterns she begins to recognize: who spends time with whom, who avoids certain gatherings, who speaks freely only in specific rooms, who listens more than they speak. Friendship in the castle is real, but it is rarely untouched by the structure around it. Still, there are moments that feel uncomplicated: shared laughter during quiet afternoons, simple walks through gardens where conversation flows without careful planning, small gifts exchanged without ceremony. these moments matter more because they are rare. Alongside friendship exists another force that quietly shapes the castle: rivalry, not always open, rarely dramatic, often subtle, a comparison of influence, a shift in attention, a change in favor from a powerful figure. These rivalries do not always involve direct conflict. Instead, they appear in small gestures. Who is invited to certain rooms? Who receives certain honors? Who is spoken to first in a gathering? The princess begins to see how easily attention becomes currency, and how quickly that currency can shift. Court gossip is the thread that connects much of this invisible world. It begins quietly, a remark overheard near a doorway, a story shared during embroidery, a rumor carried from one servant to another. By the time it reaches its destination, it may have changed entirely, yet its impact remains. Gossip is not always malicious. Sometimes it is curiosity, sometimes it is concern, sometimes it is simply the human desire to understand what is happening behind closed doors. But in a royal court, even small stories can grow into something larger. Reputations can be shaped without intention, perceptions can shift without confirmation. The princess learns to listen carefully, not to believe everything she hears, but to understand how information moves, and how quickly it can influence behavior. There are moments when she becomes the subject of that movement herself, a glance interpreted differently, a conversation remembered incorrectly, a decision viewed through someone else's perspective. She begins to understand how little control one has over how they are seen, even within their own home. At the same time, she also sees how people use these networks of conversation to navigate their world, to protect themselves, to build alliances, to stay informed. Information, in this environment, is power, but it is also risk, because the same words that connect people can also separate them. Friendships may be tested by misunderstanding, rivalries may grow from small differences in perception, trust becomes something that must be maintained, not assumed. The castle itself feels like a living web, every corridor connected to another, every room linked by invisible pathways of conversation, every person part of a larger pattern that is always shifting. As evening arrives, the atmosphere softens again, candles are lit, shadows settle into corners, the sound of voices fades into quieter tones. The princess sits near a window, thinking about the people she has come to know. Some she trusts, some she observes carefully, some she is still learning to understand, and she realizes that court life is not only about power or duty, it is also about connection, fragile, changing, sometimes genuine, sometimes uncertain, and always influenced by forces that are never fully visible. Outside, the castle appears still, but inside, the world of relationships continues to move, quietly, constantly, like a current beneath calm water. The castle feels different when time begins to move in a new direction, not through seasons, not through ceremonies, but through the quiet possibility of life itself. The princess notices it before it is ever spoken aloud, in subtle changes of tone, in careful glances exchanged between attendants, in the way certain conversations pause when she enters a room. Nothing is confirmed at first, nothing is announced, but the atmosphere shifts, as if the castle is holding its breath. Pregnancy in a medieval royal household is not viewed as a private matter. It is not only personal, it is political, it is dynastic, it is the continuation of a line that carries kingdoms forward. And so, even before certainty arrives, expectation begins to grow around it. For the princess, this creates a strange emotional space, between knowledge and uncertainty, between anticipation and pressure, between hope and fear. She begins to understand that motherhood, in her world, is never simply about family. It is about responsibility, and legacy, and survival of a dynasty. When pregnancy is confirmed, the entire rhythm of the castle changes again. There is a quiet intensity in the way people move around her. Attendants become more attentive, physicians are called more frequently, meals are adjusted carefully, rest becomes more important than ceremony. Yet even within this care, there is an undercurrent of expectation that never fully disappears. A child is not only a child, it is an heir, or a future alliance, or a continuation of political stability. The princess is aware of this without needing it to be said directly. Medical understanding in the medieval world is limited compared to later eras, yet within those limitations, there is still care. Herbs are used for comfort, rest is encouraged. Midwives and experienced attendants offer guidance shaped by tradition and observation. Still, uncertainty is always present. Pregnancy is fragile. Outcomes are never guaranteed. This fragility adds a quiet tension to daily life. The princess spends more time in softer rooms, near firelight, near trusted companions. Surrounded by people who understand her condition but also understand what it represents, there are moments of calm. Gentle conversations, quiet support from women who have experienced similar paths, stories shared in low voices about childbirth, about survival, about loss, about endurance. These conversations are not always easy, but they are honest. And honesty becomes a form of comfort in a world where much is uncertain. At the same time, expectations from the wider court continue to exist just beyond the chamber doors. Questions are asked indirectly, news is exchanged carefully, attention is subtle, but constant. Everyone understands what is at stake. A child can strengthen a kingdom, secure alliances, ensure stability, and sometimes change the future entirely. Yet beneath all of this political meaning, there is still a human experience unfolding quietly. The princess learns to live in a slower rhythm, days measured not by events, but by rest, by small changes in feeling, by the presence of those who remain close. She begins to notice how vulnerability changes perception. People speak more gently, move more carefully, listen more attentively. The castle, usually so structured and formal, softens slightly around her. There are also moments of fear, unspoken, but real. Fear of uncertainty, fear of outcome, fear of what cannot be controlled, even by kings and queens. In these moments, she finds herself thinking less about politics and more about life itself, how fragile it is, how unpredictable, how dependent on forces beyond human command. And yet, life continues, slowly, quietly, steadily. As time passes, the anticipation of the court gradually shifts into expectation of a different kind. Not just the arrival of a child, but the continuation of something larger than any single person, a lineage, a future shaped by countless decisions made long before her time. When the evening comes, the castle feels softer again. Candles glow gently in the corners of rooms. Shadows move slowly along stone walls. The princess rests near a window, listening to the distant sounds of the castle settling into night. She understands now that motherhood in her world is not only a personal journey, it is something that carries the weight of entire kingdoms. And as she looks into the darkening sky, she realizes something quietly profound. In this life, even the smallest new beginning can reshape everything that comes after it. The castle changes its rhythm before the announcement is even made. It begins in small ways, a different arrangement of voices in the corridors, a new urgency in footsteps that were once calm, servants moving slightly faster, but still careful not to appear rushed, nobles arriving earlier than expected, gathering in rooms where important decisions are quietly shaped, and then, eventually, the shift becomes official. The princess is no longer only a daughter of a royal house, she is now a queen, not in a single moment of transformation, but in a series of confirmations that slowly settle into reality, a title spoken in ceremony, a crown placed with deliberate care, a presence now recognized by every person within the castle walls. But what changes most is not the crown itself, it is the way the world responds to her. As a princess, she lived within expectations. As a queen, she begins to stand inside them. The castle feels the difference immediately. Even the air of gatherings seems more attentive. Conversations pause a fraction longer when she enters, eyes lift slightly higher, voices adjust in tone, not out of fear alone, but out of recognition of a new center of influence, yet inside her own thoughts. The change feels more complex. A queen is not simply elevated, she is also observed more closely than ever before. Every decision carries greater weight, every expression is interpreted with care. Every silence can be understood in multiple ways. The responsibility that once felt distant now feels present in every room she enters. There is ceremony, of course. The crowning itself is a moment of structured grandeur. Candles arranged in precise formation, clergy and nobles gathered in solemn order, words spoken slowly, as if each one is meant to settle deeply into memory. The crown is not heavy in a physical sense alone, it is heavy in meaning, in expectation, in history, in continuity, and when it is placed upon her head, the castle seems to pause, not dramatically, but noticeably. As if even stone and shadow recognize the significance of the moment. Afterward, life does not become simpler, it becomes more defined. A queen's presence is required in more spaces, her voice carries greater influence in discussions, her approval becomes part of decisions that shape households, alliances, and daily governance, yet much of her influence still operates within subtle boundaries, through conversation, through presence, through carefully chosen words spoken in private rooms rather than public halls. The princess she once was does not disappear, she remains within her, but now she exists alongside something larger, something more visible, something more expected. There are moments of adjustment, learning how to sit through long councils, learning how to listen to concerns that are not always directly spoken, learning how to observe without interrupting the flow of political language that fills court discussions. It is a different kind of education, one that cannot be written in books, one that must be experienced slowly, over time. At the same time, the emotional world around her also shifts. Some relationships grow stronger, based on trust built over years. Others become more formal, shaped by rank rather than familiarity. The castle reflects this change in countless small ways. Where she once walked unnoticed by some, she is now acknowledged by all. Where she once observed quietly, she is now observed in return. Even solitude feels different now, not because it disappears, but because it carries awareness of her position even in silence. Yet there are also moments of steadiness, quiet conversations with trusted companions who remember her beyond her title, brief pauses in gardens where wind moves through leaves without regard for rank or ceremony, evening hours where candles soften the edges of responsibility for a little while. In these moments, she is reminded that identity is layered. A queen is a role, but also a person still learning to exist within that role. As days pass, she begins to understand something important. A crown does not only represent authority, it also represents visibility. Everything becomes clearer to others, and less hidden for herself. By night, when the castle settles into its familiar silence, she often sits near a window reflecting on how quickly life can shift, from preparation to presence, from expectation to reality, from becoming to being. Outside, the world remains unchanged in its distant rhythms, but within the castle, everything has subtly reorganized itself around her. and as she looks into the quiet darkness beyond the walls, she understands that this is not the end of her transformation. It is only the beginning of a new kind of life, one where every choice echoes farther than before. The castle has seen thousands of lives pass through its stone halls, some remembered in stories, some carved into history books, but many left behind in silence. As the Queen moves through familiar corridors, she begins to notice something she had not fully considered before. The castle is not only a place of present life, it is also a place of forgotten lives, names that are rarely spoken, stories that exist only in fragments, women who once walked these same halls, sat in these same chambers, and looked out through the same narrow windows at the same distant horizon. But time has a way of choosing what to keep and what to let fade, and many princesses, despite their royal blood, have slowly disappeared into that fading, not because they were unimportant, but because their stories were never fully recorded, or never fully valued by the world that surrounded them. The Queen begins to understand this during quiet moments spent in older parts of the castle, sections that feel slightly different from the rest, where stone is more worn, where light falls differently across the walls, where silence feels deeper, as if it has been gathering there for centuries. In these spaces, she imagines the lives of those who came before her, young girls once preparing for duties they did not choose, princesses arranged into marriages shaped by alliances and politics, royal daughters sent to distant courts, never to return home again. Some became queens themselves, some became symbols of peace, others lived quietly, their influence absorbed into the background of history, and some are barely remembered at all. Only traces remain, a name in a record, a mention in a letter, a line in a genealogy, nothing more. Yet they lived full lives. They experienced fear, hope, expectation, loneliness, joy, just as she does. This realization creates a strange sense of connection across time, as if the walls of the castle are layered not only with stone, but with memory, invisible echoes of countless women who once stood where she now stands. There are also moments when the Queen comes across objects that feel like remnants of those forgotten lives, an old piece of embroidery stored away carefully, a faded portrait in a dim gallery, a piece of jewelry preserved not for beauty alone, but for remembrance. Each object suggests a story that was once complete, but is now only partially visible. She begins to understand that history is not only about kings, battles, or great political events, it is also shaped by lives that existed quietly in the background, lives that influence courts, families, and decisions in ways that were never fully recorded. Yet their absence from history does not mean absence from impact. The Queen reflects on how easily a person can be present in their time, and yet gradually disappear from memory, not suddenly, but slowly, as generations pass, as records fade, as attention shifts elsewhere. There is something both peaceful and unsettling about this thought. Peaceful, because it suggests continuity, that life flows onward, regardless of recognition. Unsettling, because it reminds her how fragile remembrance can be, even for those of noble birth, even for those who once held power. In quieter moments, she begins to speak with older members of the household, servants who have served for decades, attendants who remember previous generations of royal women. Their memories become a kind of living archive, not formal, not written, but carried through experience. They recall details that official records often omit, personal habits, small kindnesses, quiet struggles, the human texture of lives that history rarely captures fully. Through these conversations, the Queen realizes that memory often survives not in grand records, but in people, in stories passed softly from one person to another. As evening settles over the castle, she walks alone through a corridor lined with ancestral portraits, faces looking down from carved frames, some familiar, some nearly forgotten. Each one a reminder that her life is part of a much longer chain, and that one day she too will become part of that same uncertain memory. The question is not whether she will be remembered, but how, or if at all. Outside, the wind moves gently across the castle grounds. Inside, candles flicker along the walls of history, and the Queen continues walking slowly forward, carrying with her the awareness that every life, no matter how grand or quiet, eventually becomes part of something larger. And sometimes, something nearly lost. Night does not fall suddenly inside a medieval castle. It arrives slowly, like a breath being released after a long day. First, the light outside the windows begins to soften, then the corridors grow quieter, then voices fade into distant echoes that no longer travel as far as they did in daylight, and finally, the castle settles into its true nighttime form, not empty, never empty, but still. The Queen walks through this stillness slowly, her footsteps echo gently against stone floors that have known centuries of similar nights, some filled with celebration, some filled with worry, some filled with silence just like this one. Candlelight flickers along the walls, casting long shadows that shift as she passes. The castle feels different at night, not larger, not smaller, but deeper, as if its history becomes more visible when the world outside grows dark. She moves through familiar corridors, now transformed by shadow and silence, doors closed, tapestries still, windows reflecting faint light like distant memories. Somewhere in the distance, a servant continues their final rounds, a guard changes position near a gate. A fire is adjusted so it will last until morning. Life has not stopped, it has simply slowed into its quietest form. The Queen pauses near a window overlooking the courtyard. Below, the world is almost entirely dark, only faint outlines of stone and garden remain visible under starlight. The same place that was full of movement during the day now rests in complete stillness. It is in this contrast that she understands the castle most clearly. It is never one thing. It is always shifting, always layered, always alive in different ways depending on the hour. She thinks of everything that has passed through these walls, princesses who once walked similar paths, servants whose names are forgotten but whose work still holds the castle together, kings and queens whose choices shaped entire generations, and countless unnamed lives that filled the spaces in between. All of them, in some way, still present here. Not physically, but in memory, in structure, in atmosphere. The castle feels like a place built not only of stone, but of time itself. As she continues walking, she enters her private chamber. Candles burn softly, their flame steady and small. The room feels warmer than the corridors outside, more contained, more personal. She sits near the fire, watching the movement of light against stone. There is no audience now, no court, no ceremony, only quiet presence. In these moments, thought becomes clearer, not louder, just more honest. She reflects on how much has changed since she first entered the castle, how many versions of herself have existed within these same walls. Daughter, princess, wife, queen, each one shaped by the same environment, yet experiencing it differently. She realizes that life here is not defined by a single identity, but by layers of identity that accumulate over time. Outside, the wind moves gently across the castle grounds. Inside, the fire continues its steady rhythm. There is a kind of peace in this contrast. The world is large, but this moment is small, and both exist at the same time. She begins to understand something that cannot be taught through ceremony or instruction.